Imagine the World Cup without Mbappe, Haaland, or Bellingham. That could happen because European countries are threatening to boycott any future World Cups unless football's world governing body FIFA drops plans to sell stakes in the competitions to investors. What on earth is going on? We'll try and work it out in this episode of Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio. And first of all, we're going to talk about this huge bust-up around international football. And it goes like this. A few days ago, Gianni Infantino, who's the boss of FIFA, football's world governing body, unveiled this hitherto secret plan to create a new subsidiary company which would oversee FIFA's international events like World Cups, men's and women's, and others, and allow private investors to buy a stake in that, which means they could make money out of it. Now, this plan would have to be approved by a majority of the national federations who comprise the FIFA membership. And this has caused uproar amongst lots of the federations. So, for example, on Thursday night, UEFA, which represents the 55 European federations, said, no way are we going along with this. And if it happens, we will boycott any future FIFA events, like the World Cup. And throughout Friday, we've seen more and more federations doing the same things, which means that the future of Gianni Infantino, a quite controversial person in world football anyway, is starting to look a little bit hazy. So it is an interesting story where there is a complete collision between football, money, power, politics, America, the rest of the world, and also just these huge spectacles that you can buy into, whether you like football or not. Or in this case, actually buy into if you're a rich investor. So to help us understand what's going on, we're joined in the Newscast studio by BBC business editor Simon Jack. Hi, Simon.
Hello, Adam.
And you come bearing a PowerPoint presentation.
I have got hold of the PowerPoint presentation that was sent by FIFA to the 211 member organisations, mapping out why they're trying to do this plan and what they'll get out of it and why it's a good idea.
And we will dig into those numbers in that presentation in a second. But we're also joined by BBC Sports News presenter Jane Dougall, who's on the line. Hello, Jane.
Hello, Adam. Hello, Simon.
Hello.
So before Simon does the numbers and gives us a little PowerPoint presentation with no clicker, Jane, can you just give us the big picture about what the FIFA boss Gianni Infantino is actually trying to achieve here? And then we can do the numbers and the politics.
Yeah. So this has been a seismic moment in football. We knew that UEFA, the European branch, as it were, of world football, had been critical of FIFA's handling of this proposal that they have to sell off stakes in FIFA's major events to private investors. They had said that FIFA was using the sport to enrich themselves and their friends. So UEFA called an emergency meeting of all 55 of its members. We knew that they were going to be discussing the possibility of boycotting future World Cups and future FIFA tournaments in protest of these proposals. But we did not imagine that they would all vote unanimously in favour of that and that the statement that they would issue would be so strong. They said the World Cup's not for sale. They called FIFA irresponsible and said it was indefensible that a proposal of such significance for football was conceived in secret. This is not merely a profound failure of leadership, but an abdication of FIFA's duty as the custodian of world football. Really, really strong sentiments. And then following that, other organisations, other confederations have joined forces with UEFA. It's quite strange because we're not used to this sort of unity in football in their distaste of what FIFA President Gianni Infantino is proposing.
And as chance would have it, I was presenting Newsnight on Thursday night. So I spoke to Laura McAllister, who's a UEFA vice president. She'd been at this emergency meeting and she was very vocal on Newsnight about how they all felt. So here's a little sample of our conversation.
Lots of people felt that for some of the smaller federations, the carrot of a big cash injection would be significant. But I'm pleased to say that every federation, small, medium and large, backed the position that UEFA's leadership has taken this week. And therefore, it was very, very easy to reach consensus. It was, it was emotional, but I think there was a real sense of purpose there. And I felt that this was a very clear line in the sand in terms of the politics and the organisation of football. And it was incumbent on us, as probably the most powerful confederation in Europe, to stand up and be counted and come up with a threat, the boycott threat, that is commensurate with the damage that such a proposal would do to our game.
And so, Jane, just to be clear, in a future universe where these plans went through, which is actually looking quite unlikely now, that would mean that you could have a World Cup with no European countries in it because UEFA was boycotting it because they didn't like this plan.
Yes,
in theory,
that was what they were threatening to do. That's what they are threatening to do if these proposals go through. And the reason why they're threatening to do it is because they feel that the soul of football has been sucked out of it, out of this whole competition. These controversial plans, if I just sort of talk you through them as well, they would include the sale of FIFA's commercial rights to external investors, which would include broadcasting, sponsorship, ticketing and licensing, and possibly the delivery of its tournaments. But not only did FIFA come up with this plan without consulting any of the confederations, they also sent a letter to all 211 members saying to them that if they were to agree to the plan, then they would each receive £30 million, which for some smaller nations would be a huge amount, which could be game-changing, really. So some people are describing it as something of a bribe.
So, Simon, let's dive into the presentation you've got there. So many interesting aspects to how FIFA wants this to work and why they might be doing it.
So bottom line, it is about money. And FIFA feels that they are not making enough out of their valuable events, which include not only just the World Cup, which is every 4 years, but also the World Club Championship, where basically the winners of the Champions League play the Copa America and South America to crown the best club in the world. And they've got this very interesting stat here. They're saying that the amount that FIFA makes per year, per fan, on average, is $1. And they compare that to the Premier League, for example, which is $2.6 per fan per year, and to the NFL, American football, which gets nearly $53 per fan per year. So they're saying the NFL's making 50 times per fan per year what we're making. We want a bit of that. We want to be a bit more like that. Now, I would say that that's a bit of a false comparison because you've got an event which doesn't happen very often, and you're talking about something which happens every week in the US and every week in the Premier League. But nevertheless, that's what they're trying to say. And as Jane rightly says, they're trying to dangle, it's both a carrot and a stick, and a lot of people call it a bribe. Sign up to this, will give you 15 million quid immediately or by the end of the year, and another 15 million when and if this deal goes through. And, Jane's right that, that's peanuts to, UEFA and the FA and what have you.
Because they're wealthy.
Because they're wealthy. But if you are Montserrat or you're Andorra,
Cape Verde,
the unlikely heroes of the World Cup recently, then sort of something like Montserrat, this is about 40% of their entire GDP. And so I think that what they thought is that although the other umbrella organisations might get a bit uppity about this, and boy did they, that they could do almost like a hostile takeover, take it directly to the shareholders, if you like, and say, well, do you want it or not? And by
leverage
the way,
the smaller countries against the richer ones.
Correct,
to get it
which
through.
is a little bit like the International Olympic Committee used to work, in the sense that they would try and dangle something in front of the smaller countries because the sheer number of them would win the day.
And Simon, in that presentation, do the consultants and the people involved in doing this deal and making this presentation, do they explain how the World Cup and the FIFA events would change to make it go from $1 per fan to something more like $50 per fan?
Well, they say
they
would look at increasing the number of teams in the World Cup. We already had a big increase, so they might take it up to 64, and they might make some changes. So you had phases of the World Club Championship, so there'd be more stuff going on. But there was a feeling that they, you remember the hullabaloo about ticket prices and all that kind of stuff that went on, hospitality, and there's all sorts of licensing partners, and you've got your credit card partner and all this kind of stuff, all adds up. They think they can squeeze a bit more. But what they're looking for, the reason they wanted to bring private investors, is they think we need some people who've got the commercial nous to try and maximise value, who know this stuff better than we do. Now, in their defence, what they say is that we're not the only sport who does this. PGA Golf does this. A very good example is Formula One. And as a fear, I think a lot of people thought that Gianni Infantino would become like the Bernie Ecclestone of football, with almost total control over the commercial rights. And I have to say that Infantino could not have possibly prepared the pitch worse for this idea. First of all, there was the Peace Prize to Donald Trump. Then there was the overturning of the red card at Donald Trump's bequest.
For the American striker.
For the American striker. And then the lead partner, or the lead private investor, the cornerstone investor in this, is a company run by Donald Trump's son-in-law's brother. So you put all that together, and Infantino's widespread unpopularity, and I think that they basically could not have sold this idea worse if they tried.
And Jane, just as we were getting ready to record this episode of Newscast, we checked to see if there's a name for your son-in-law's brother in kind of genealogy, and it's like your co-son-in-law. Who knew?
There we go.
Yes. Anyway, so Jane, so that's the numbers, and that's the business plan. Where have we got to with the politics then? So when I was doing Newsnight last night, UEFA had said, no way we're doing this. We will boycott future events if it goes ahead. UEFA is 55 members of FIFA, and there's 211. And you would need half of the 211 for this to go ahead. What's the tally now?
So Infantino needs a majority of 106 to get his proposal through. The Asian Football Confederation, who earlier today said that they would join the other two confederations, they've got 47 members, but 46 of them are FIFA members. And then CONCACAF, which is Central America, North America and the Caribbean, they have 41 members, but 35 of them have a vote. They're FIFA members. So that adds up to 136 associations. Associations of three confederations. Now, this is just guesswork at the moment, because you have to assume that they will all toe the line and vote the way that their confederation tells them to. So 3 confederations, UEFA, CONCACAF and the Asian Federation, they have all said, we don't want these proposals. But then there's each individual country within it that you would hope would toe the line and go along with what their confederation is asking. And if that does happen, then there will be 136 associations that could potentially vote against these plans, in which case they wouldn't happen. Now, if that's the case and the proposal is dead in the water, the question then remains, what is the future for Gianni Infantino? Can he continue?
I also was just going to ask, will there be a vote, or will this be like Keir Starmer's welfare reforms and they pull them to avoid the embarrassment of losing?
No, there is actually a deadline. So Infantino sent a letter to all 211 member associations telling them that they had until the 19th of September to agree to this deal or not. And it's a straight majority, as we mentioned, whether it goes through or not, so they can vote to say yes or no. So we will know by the 19th of September whether it's going to happen or not.
And also, we just had the Prime Minister this afternoon weighed in saying Gianni Infantino is not the right person to lead FIFA. So it's becoming, it's getting to the highest echelons of or whatever, because, football is the most popular game in the world. FIFA are just saying we could be making more money out of it. UEFA and others, it's not like FIFA's short of money. They made about 12, they probably have made $12 billion. So £10 billion, £9 billion in the last 4 years, which is double the previous 4 year cycle.
It was $15 billion they made from the World Cup this summer.
That's an up-to-date number, thank you.
Although I would just say, thinking about Andy Burnham, easier for him to complain about Gianni Infantino and basically insinuate he should be replaced than to say, complain about Donald Trump and call for him to be replaced, because the stakes are very different there. So, Simon, where do you think this is going then? So, listening to what Jane was saying...
Yeah, my instinct is, I think that FIFA made a miscalculation here. They actually thought that they could reach beyond the umbrella organisations, the UEFA and CONCACAF, and appeal directly to the smaller nations. And it does look at the moment like those smaller nations are falling into line behind their umbrella organisations. This smacks to me very much of, you may remember a few years ago, there was an attempt to create a European Super League. And funnily enough, the bankers who were involved in that, JP Morgan, are also involved in this project. They've got a big sports business.
Well, I can take you back to that, because that was when I was the chief political correspondent doing Henry's job doing the news in the morning. And normally, most mornings, I would have to call Downing Street at about 6:15 to get the latest lines from them about what the government thought about issue X or issue Y or issue Z. That morning, the second I woke up, I think Downing Street called me to tell me how vehemently they were opposing the Super League plans, which tells you about the political salience of messing with football.
There's kind of, competitive stuff here. UEFA, they're saying they're selling football. Now, FIFA would say we were only going to sell a minority stake. We're just going to bring in cleverer money people, try and extract a bit more money, which we would put in, by the way, into more resources, more money for local federations, more coaches, all this kind of good stuff. But, I can imagine the UEFA sort of saying, listen, if anyone's going to gouge more money out of football, it'll be us. Thanks very much, not you guys. So they don't like being sort of usurped onto their territory.
Jane, Simon knows I always like to end on a philosophical note, just to set our friends of the podcast a big brain teaser before they go. Here's the one for you. Why is it okay for big private investors to own football clubs in the UK, but not for there to be some investment in events for FIFA like the World Cup?
Because a lot of fans would argue that football doesn't belong to anybody, that it belongs to everybody. And to sell it off in the manner that Gianni Infantino is proposing is to dismantle the very soul of something that people feel so passionately about, that it's not just a hobby, it's a way of life. And to tinker with that is very dangerous, as we saw, as you mentioned, with the proposal for the European Super League in 2021. That lasted for 48 hours before the outrage of the fans dismantled it very quickly. And actually, it's very interesting that you brought that up, because Gianni Infantino has to restand for his position next March. At the moment, he's unopposed. But the name that is coming up again and again is a man called Nasser Al-Khelaifi. He is president of Paris Saint-Germain. But at the time of the Super League collapsing, the European Super League collapsing, he took over as chairman of the European Clubs Association and basically smoothed everything over. He's very well respected. He's a Qatari and he's a very powerful man in football. So he is one of the logical supposed successors to Gianni Infantino. So watch this space.
So interesting.
I think just one observation I'd make about this is it's reinforced to me, and this may be obvious to others, but reinforced to me the fact that US appetite for our national game, they want in. All in. In fact, I think something like 13 of the 20 Premier League clubs are majority owned by Americans. So, I blame Ted Lasso for this. Ted
Apple TV show about
and
football
Welcome
stuff.
to Wrexham, where, of course, Ryan Reynolds...
Basically, two TV shows that gave Americans a greater appetite for football.
Great appetite. They saw it as a really, whether a quaint or an attractive or financially attractive cultural property, and they wanted in. And so the American ownership of UK football and football generally has never been higher.
Isn't it interesting? And this is my last philosophical point. Let's see where this goes. That often we're told, Europeans look at the UK and say, you've got such an Anglo-Saxon model of capitalism where everything's up for sale. And then us Brits go, no, we're a mixture of European and American. We're just got our own British kind of recipe of the different elements. And then you look at what happens when Americans get involved in something like football, as they would call soccer, and you realise actually American capitalism is different from British capitalism, which may indeed be different from what they have on the continent.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Maybe. There we go. Ringing endorsement of my theory. Simon, thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam.
And Jane, good to catch up with you too.
And you, Adam.
See you, Jane.
Bye.
There have been big developments in Gaza, namely that Hamas appear to have signed up to a deal that involves them handing over their weapons, which would be effectively the end of their armed struggle against Israel. And it also sounds like Israel might potentially have agreed to withdraw from Gaza as well. So if all that happens, that would be a huge moment for the Middle East. And the person who's been monitoring these developments for a long time, and especially today, is the BBC's international editor, Jeremy Bowen, who's on the line. Hi, Jeremy.
Hey, how are you, Adam?
Good, thank you. Good to catch up. So in terms of the timeline, the very long, slightly tortuous timeline about Gaza, put these events today into context.
Well, this did not happen overnight. there has been a process building in terms of, well, first of all, if you think back to October of last year, that's when they had the ceasefire. That's when there were a couple of different Donald Trump and his people-driven agreements, one of which he hailed as the greatest thing to have happened in the Middle East in 3,000 years. And essentially, there were various points about the way that Gaza would be dealt with in the future in those deals. And over a protracted period of negotiations, which involved, there's a UN envoy, as well as that, the Turks have been very active. The Egyptians have been particularly active because the talks have been held in Cairo, not least, a lot of them. And so Hamas have also, our information is, have moved towards being more open to accept things. And that is because there's been precious little or no reconstruction. People are in a terrible state there. They're also have somewhat lost control, I think, such as they had, of law and order, because there are these Israeli-sponsored militias who roam around at times. So essentially, they didn't have that many choices, and they decided in the end to sign up to this deal, which actually, for them, it has a number of positives. First of all, it might allow some reconstruction to happen. Second, this is assuming it goes ahead, of course.
What is it that we think Hamas have signed up to?
Well, there have been two contentious points that they'd signed up to everything else in terms of things like a new form of governance in the territory, a new kind of technocratic Palestinian administration, the idea that there would be some other measures taken which would enable. I mean, to be honest, none of it, if you go back through the original documents, there's no detail there. So there's a lot that needs to be worked out. But there were two outstanding points, one of which was on disarmament. And that is the most important thing, because that's what stopped any kind of diplomatic progress. And the other one was essentially about things to do with governance, with the people who are in various roles that they employ at the moment. I'm talking about civil servants as well, who keep ministries going, such as there are these days. I mean, the thing is that the 30% or so that they control is barely governed in the way that, you can no longer say that this is a mini state-led, as you might have been able to before. You certainly can't now. Most people are intense, for goodness sake, and dependent on aid. So those were the two outstanding points. And the most significant single point is that for the first time, Hamas has agreed to disarm, and that is new.
And Jeremy, I'm sure you've seen lots of examples around the world of groups saying they will hand over their weapons. How do we think this might work in this case?
Well, of course, these things are all different, and in some cases, groups get absorbed into the armed forces of a state. Well, there is no functioning Palestinian state. Many countries recognize the existence of one, but there's no functioning state, so it's not that. One very good example was in Northern Ireland after the Good Friday Agreement, when there were protracted negotiations and I think the phrase was to put the IRA weapons beyond use. And that required a huge amount of very, very detailed stuff. And the thing about the agreement that Donald Trump, surprise, surprise, has announced is there's very little detail about how it's actually going to work, because it's not just about weapons. It's about their tunnel network, revealing where the tunnels are, where the entrances are, making it all public, all that sort of thing. But in Northern Ireland, it was crucial to the completion of that whole peace process. It was a vital stage in it, and equally, this is a vital stage. It's invidious to compare the two. I'm always very reluctant to compare the situation and the troubles in Northern Ireland with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There are so many things that are different. But on this, I mean, what we can learn from it is these processes require detailed diplomacy and staff work. And because let's assume there's no trust between parties who've been trying to kill each other. There also has to be very verifiable. So we don't know that detail as yet.
And also, it usually needs a trusted third party, and Israel tends to never trust any third parties.
No, and the third party the Israelis sometimes have trusted is the Americans. Apart from the fact they're having a rift with them at the moment, the Palestinians don't trust them. So other countries are going to be very much involved. Countries which have been really involved in this process from the very outset of the ceasefire talks have been particularly Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar. And they have, all three countries have pretty good relations with Donald Trump. They have been, Palestinians have been persuaded to trust them to a degree. The Israelis don't trust them. But the thing is, at the moment, Mr. Netanyahu, the prime minister, is under double pressure. One set of pressures comes from the fact he faces an election in October, a general election. And in that election, if his opponents, who the main ones are pretty right wing, if they were to say, well, you just crumbled to Hamas, you've just given in to them, you've given them a sweetheart deal, that's not going to win. That's not going to win him votes. But equally, Donald Trump, at least his Republican Party, faces elections in November, the midterms in America, and he's at the moment engaged in this, well, the makings of a forever war that he swore he'd never get America involved in again with Iran, and he needs some wins. So he wants this thing to work. So he's putting pressure on Netanyahu. So he's on one side, he's got his base who'll be very unhappy about this, and his political opponents. On the other hand, there's Donald Trump saying, right then, come on, do this. You have to do it. I have leverage over you. We keep you going. We are now your only friend left in the world. Not quite true, but that's what several American officials have been saying. And so, yeah, so I think that what Netanyahu will do is probably play for time between now and the election. He's pretty good at that.
And also the Israelis, are they not obligated under this deal to withdraw entirely from Gaza or even withdraw partially?
Well, that is the central bargain in this. And if it was simply a deal to Hamas gives up their weapons, then Israelis would be very suspicious because they don't trust Hamas because of the killings on the 7th of October and other things. But they'd say, all right, let's see how it goes. But it's a quid pro quo. It's a tit for tat. So the deal, the bargain at the center of all of this is that Hamas gives up its weapons and Israel pulls out. And that was in the original deal as well, the Trump deal. The Israelis are saying, well, we might think about it if we are convinced you've given up all your weapons. And Hamas are essentially at the moment saying, well, if you don't start withdrawing, we're not giving up any weapons.
And Jeremy, we started this conversation by talking about kind of the tortuous process that got us here, and the 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes 3 steps back, the lack of detail, but also still some progress at the same time. I mean, can we say that Donald Trump's quite strange idea or innovative idea or novel idea of the Board of Peace might have worked here?
I think it's a bit too early to say that. The idea of a board of peace overseeing everything was roundly condemned as a neo-colonialist idea. How come is it that a bunch of mostly white Americans and Europeans are going to tell these people how to live their lives? That was the essential message that people were coming out with. I think this means, however, that the Americans do have leverage, and when they get involved, things can happen. And that has always been the case because they're a very powerful and influential country, not least with the Israelis, if they care to use the leverage. So Donald Trump, I mean, he always claims credit for anything that works well, and he tends to blame everybody else if it doesn't work out. But certainly on this occasion, if this goes through, and there are many reasons why it might not, if it goes through, then yes, I think he'd be quite justified in patting himself on his back for his contribution.
Jeremy, thank you so much for bringing us up to date.